Yes.
So I just was speaking with Bryce, who's our kind of our guardian angel for our meeting, and he was talking to me about how we have something called Hungry Buffs. Hungry Buffs. So when lunchtime comes, we'll all order something online from Hungry Buffs, and because no one's going to want to go out in this weather and walk several miles to a restaurant. We may not see you again. So we want you to stay here. And the other thing I want to talk about too is we have, at our conference today, we have a Shameless Commerce Division. I'll do the Vanna White thing. And we've got the books by Ward Churchill and Alice Drager and Joe Barry.
Would they be willing to autograph these books?
And Jonathan Rees and Jonathan Ports. So our idea was that people might be interested in buying the books and then having the authors sign them because the authors are here. So we have those stage right. So I want to talk a little bit about the community college effort in AAUP. Don informed me this morning that it was years ago that the AAUP accidentally created the segregation of academic labor with these two categories, and now is catching up and trying to make important changes, and I'm part of that change. So I'm second vice president of AAUP, and we're going to hear today from Nate Bork, who is the first adjunct faculty member from the community college system here in Colorado to ever be investigated by AAUP's Committee A for academic freedom violations. And also we have Joe Barry, who's author of the famous book Reclaiming the Ivory Tower, which I've purchased years ago and almost have worn out the underlining passages. So, and then we have Maria Risto, who is director of the New Faculty Majority. So I don't want to talk much, I'd rather have all these important people speak. But just to give you some small idea of the waning academic freedom in the community college system, which is, by the way, the largest institution of higher education in the state of Colorado. We have 144,000 students. We have more than $250 million in reserves. The president of our organization has received a 58% pay increase in the last several years, and last year, under great fanfare, announced that the adjunct faculty were also going to get a raise. We got $4.80 a week. So our chapters take adjunct faculty to food banks and line them up with subsidized health care, and we can even help them find housing. But meanwhile, back at the ranch, in terms of academic freedom, in our department, we are being pressured to use colors instead of grades. And some of our teachers are being pressured to use Legos, pipe cleaners, to teach English composition. And this last week, I was forced to give an assessment that was handed down from Illumin Corporation, and I had nothing to do with it. I didn't get to design it. It took a week of my time, for which I will not be paid. And it's being run by a student from the veterinary school at CSU, and I teach the English department. So we have all kinds of problems with academic freedom, as if we even have any in the community college system. So I'm going to turn the microphone over now to Nate Bork. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Nathaniel Bork. I teach philosophy. I'm currently teaching at Arapahoe. I was teaching at a community college Aurora up until last September. So when I went to college as a student, I started in 1999, and my idea was that I was taking out loans and doing work study, and I had to put myself through college for various reasons. That I was a student. I was going there to be a student, to learn from people who knew more. And my goal there was for them to set challenges for me, that I would meet those challenges, and that's how I was going to learn. When I graduated and I became a teacher myself, that's what I did in my classroom. That was basically my same understanding. And for the first 5 years or so, that's what I saw. So certain decisions were made for me. My book selection, I wasn't allowed to choose that. I had to do an assessment project, but I'm like, well, those are small things, I can live with that. About 3 years ago, they came in and said, you're going to use this new book. Students have to buy it new every semester, there's an online code, and you're going to use this new homework. And the homework we're going to give you to give to the students comes from a corporation, And one of the questions I actually had to ask my students was, is Kant's categorical imperative hypothetical or categorical? That was a question I had to ask college level students. And that was my first where is this going? Come up to last year, which the issue where I was fired over, they handed us a series of redesigned things where they sort of told down to us, I had to reduce the content in my class by 20%, at least 20%. I had to get rid of all of it. I had to get all my groups up to an 80% pass rate. 80% of black men, white women, white Latinos, Asian males, every group had to make 80% across the board. And in fact, if I wasn't doing that, I would face disciplinary problems and I would eventually be fired. That was what they told me was going to be the passing rate. They encouraged me to increase my participation of women and minorities as people we talk about up to 30%, which seems like a good idea, except when you're talking about Greek philosophy, it was all white males because those are the only people who were allowed to speak or have any kind of opinion on the subject. They're the only ones who are educated. And there's just not a lot of work from antiquity featuring non-white males from the subject of philosophy. I was allowed to assign a single 6 to 8 page paper per semester, or I could break it up into 2 3 to 4 page papers per semester. I was forbidden explicitly, do not add supplemental assignments to try to make up for the reading list. 8 pages is the max per semester for these college students. And at least 5 classes out of a 32 class semester were going to be remedial English. How to write a paper, how to do anything like this. It was going to be very, very basic skills. And I said, this doesn't really feel like college anymore. This is the last time I took a class that was like this was probably early high school, 9th grade, 10th grade. I went to a good high school. So I wrote a letter, I said to the HLC, the Higher Learning Commission, and I said, hey, I'm kind of worried about this. This doesn't feel like it's a college class anymore. And just for the act of protesting, just for the act of being concerned that we had lowered our standards so much to get to these pass rates, I was let go. I was also told that these lower standards, these 6 to 8 page papers per semester, and all that didn't get me to 80%, they would come back into my classroom again, redesign it further down until I got there. They were going to make the class so easy that they were going to get this 80% rate because that's what they wanted in terms of student enrollment. The idea was that if students didn't succeed, they wouldn't keep spending money, and if they didn't keep spending money, that was a bad thing, so therefore, drop, 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 drop. Part of what I'm seeing here is, there's a whole bunch of causal forces that have led to this moment in time, but one of the big ones is we've kind of gone to this corporate model, where where I'm no longer a teacher, I'm now an employee of the college. We no longer have students, we have customers. And the customer is always right? Heard that? And what the customers want right now is they want comfort, they want ease. They want the easy thing. They want to be told, they don't want to be challenged, they don't want to be made to feel uncomfortable. They don't want anything that's going to push them to have to grow. And so that's now what we're delivering. Because the idea is we make maximum profits. And that is where the whole model is going. And so the problem, the reason we don't see a whole lot of intellectual diversity, and conservatives in particular sort of push out of the picture, is well, that doesn't move product. We have these units we need to move. Oh my God, you said something the students haven't heard before. They don't like that at all. They're not going to come back. You have to move product. That's what we're here for. Get rid of everybody who says something that we're not okay with. And that's a real threat to freedom, and that's a real threat to developing people who are minds that can actually withstand challenges. We have to push character and growth. We have to teach people how to actually think and withstand challenges from people who don't think like them. And we're sort of seeing that us go away from that. So in my classroom, on the topic of diversity, how I've always handled it is just by pushing fairness. The definition of validity is an argument is valid if and only if there are no possible conclusion or no possible scenarios which the premises are true and the conclusion false at the same time. So I have students from all over the place, right? Communist, conservative, anarchist, liberal, everything. And I say, okay, great, perfect. There are no sacred cows in my classroom. No matter who you are, what you believe, what you're reading, bring it up. I will never ever tell you we're not allowed to discuss that. Anything at all is fair game. But when we discuss things, I say, okay, well, what are your premises? Are they based on actual facts? Is this actually true? What is your internal logic? Does one actually fall from the other? And from there, I've been very, very successful as a teacher because people are welcome to say anything. People don't shut up in my classroom. I tell people, you're being offended is not being harmed. You're allowed to hear things you don't like. And part of growing up and part of becoming a mature citizen, part of learning how to do philosophy is saying, oh, you said something that I don't actually agree with. Well, figure out why they're wrong or change your views. Because you might be wrong. And that's actually, Milo's come up a few times. He starts off his lectures very frequently with saying, consider this, you might be wrong. And I completely agree with that. I might be wrong. Everyone in here, you might be wrong too. It's always something you have to consider. What if I'm mistaken? What if I made some error in judgment? What if I talked my way into believing something that I shouldn't have actually believed? And part of philosophy is always going back to that, right? Socrates is famous for saying, my wisdom is that I know nothing. You know? Whatever you have, you don't actually get knowledge and truth. Like, that's very hard to get to. You have a really good guess. And that guess, until it's proven absolutely beyond a shadow of a doubt, it should be open to suspicion. I've been a long time. One thing I do in my classrooms is I'll play devil's advocate. If I have a class that's really diverse and I have all kinds of opinions, that's great. Like, they'll handle that themselves. They'll argue back and forth, and I just sort of play referee. So that no one makes it personal, no one that goes too far breaks into slurs. But if there's a class and they're all on one side of the equation, I'll take the other side and I'll present that side to the best of my ability. Because that's how you actually challenge people to learn how to do philosophy, how to engage in legal arguments. You said this, the other person says this, well, how can you actually kind of figure all that out? We go over everything. And part of the way I handle trigger warnings is I come from kind of a rough place. And so I say, we're going to talk about really rough things. We're going to talk about things that will trigger any normal person. We're going to talk about child molestation, war, genocide, death, famine, science, technology, horrible dystopian possibilities because of where science is leading us. I'm a big fan of Ray Kurzweil, so we talk about all that stuff. Because these things need to be discussed. Just because you don't look at the dangers of the world, just because you don't acknowledge things, doesn't mean they're any less real. And so, because I have this view that people should be challenged and people should be held to a high standard, that is not profitable, and that was the basis of my termination. Kept myself under 10 minutes, Don. All right, thank you guys.
Hi everybody, I am Maria Maisto. I co-founded and I run New Faculty Majority. For those of you who don't know what that is, it is a national nonprofit that is focused on improving the quality of education by improving the working conditions of the majority of the faculty, which, as you know, is 70%, 70 to 75%, depending on how you count, contingent. So the first thing that I want to say, and I might get into trouble with Nate for saying this, is in answer to the question, do contingent faculty have academic freedom? The answer is yes and no at the same time. By definition, we do not have academic freedom because we have no access, or we have very limited access, if at all. If we have unions, we don't in situations like mine in Ohio where I'm not unionized. But we don't have formal access to due process and grievance procedures through which we can secure our academic freedom. So that is in fact true. Structurally, we do not have academic freedom in the same way that tenured faculty do. However, there is nothing stopping us from exercising our academic freedom, which is an inherent right, and it doesn't mean that we won't get fired for it or we won't be challenged in some way, but we do have it. And many contingent faculty who are not dependent on their work as contingent faculty for survival often exercise that academic freedom, whether they're retired or whether they simply don't care, the Janis Joplin kind of approach. So it is true, I think, that academic freedom is a little bit more interesting to talk about with respect to contingent faculty. That being said, I do think that we are required as a profession to think about and exercise strategies to promote, secure, and defend academic freedom for contingent faculty and indeed for all faculty. And so what I want to suggest today are a few strategies for doing that, specifically for contingent faculty, and I think that this extends to tenure-line faculty as well. So number one is socialization. And what I mean by that is going back to educating professors, folks who go into higher education, about what academic freedom is, why it's important for the profession, why we need to defend it. I think the case can be made and has been made, especially by Jerry Gaff and Neil Hamilton in their white paper that Neil Hamilton is someone with AAUP, he's a lawyer with AAUP. They produced a white paper 5 or 6, no, probably longer, 8 or 9 years ago on the future of the professoriate. And their argument is that part of the problem, part of the reason that we have moved to this corporate model is our own fault, in the sense that we have not socialized our own colleagues and our graduate students to understand what our rights and obligations are as members of the profession and the role of academic freedom and tenure and shared governance in the profession. So we have an obligation to do that with our graduate students. We have an obligation to do that with our colleagues as well. The second strategy is legal action, which AAUP has been engaged in, in a very welcome way, especially with respect to contingent faculty in recent years. I'm thinking not just of Nate's case, but of Robin Mead's case in Illinois. She was a union president who was fired for criticizing the institution, and she won her case, got a $100,000 settlement, and AAUP was really instrumental in securing that victory. But in addition to that kind of legal action, I would also remind us that we have to pay attention to the legal framework that we don't often pay attention to with respect to our employment and with respect to our status as employees. So things like our classification under the FLSA. How many of you know what your classification is under the FLSA, the Fair Labor Standards Act? So very few people, whether tenure line or contingent, know the difference between an exempt and non-exempt employee, between an employee and an independent contractor. So most professors, even contingent professors, are exempt employees under the FLSA. And you may have heard about that because there was an attempt by the Obama administration to increase the minimum salary requirement to classify as exempt. The reason that's important, and I'm not going to go into all the arguments about whether or not we should be arguing for changing that designation or what we should do about it, but it's important to know what those legal frameworks are so that we can figure out strategies for how we can change our status and invoke more protections of the law as they currently exist. One other legal strategy that I want to tell you about is how many of you know that adjuncts can apply for unemployment insurance in between terms? If you don't know that, you should, and you should be encouraging all adjuncts to apply for unemployment because we are supposed to receive it because we do not have what's called reasonable assurance of continued employment with our employer. However, colleges usually contest that, claiming that we do, when in fact we don't. So one of the projects that NFM has taken on over the last 5 or 6 years has been to get the Department of Labor to issue clarification that contingent faculty do have access to unemployment because we do not have reasonable assurance. So this letter was issued in December, in the last hours of the Obama administration. And what's very interesting about it is that there is one case, they always give example cases so that the state unemployment agencies will be able to adjudicate the claims that are in front of them. But one case actually says that if you are terminated or if you voluntarily quit for good cause because of, and the example actually states, because you refused to submit to the employer's pressure to reduce your standards, your academic standards, they cannot then deny you unemployment compensation. So even if you quit, you would still get unemployment. And I think in a case like yours, you would still be qualified for unemployment because that would be a just cause. So, so the kind of work that we can do to educate federal agencies and state agencies to really enact protections under the law are really important. And finally, and this is probably the most important one, and Joe's going to talk more about this too, because this is his wheelhouse, is organizing. Organizing in whatever way and whatever context you can do it, but to get started organizing whether or not you have the immediate opportunity to unionize, start organizing at the local level. Caprice has been doing this for quite a while now. I'm trying to do it in Ohio, even though, and we're really being successful in spite of laws that create obstacles. Part of that organizing is I want to extend the sort of concept of organizing in addition to organizing for the purpose of unionization. I also want us to think about, in the interest of the conversation that we had previously, but to reach out to adjuncts who are not the kinds of adjuncts that naturally gravitate toward this kind of organizing. We have a lot of adjuncts who are the traditional adjuncts who come in, who work maybe in a profession in town, and they come in and they teach one class, and we tend to ignore them. But we have to reach out to them and make them part of the movement, not just because they can help us in securing our rights, but because they are indeed our colleagues in the profession, and that's part of our obligation as part of our need to socialize our colleagues into the profession and defend academic freedom within the profession. So I'm going to stop there so that we have enough time for
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Oh, you got it.
You want to give me a marker when I got a couple minutes left?
I will indeed, yes.
Thank you.
We're going to throw something at your head when that happens.
Excuse me?
Please go right ahead, Joe.
I'm also hard of hearing, and so I'm easy to make fun of because, I can't tell when people are joking often, I don't hear what people say the first time, etc. If it weren't for the hearing aids, I would probably just be in a closet somewhere. I am also, as some of the other people in this room are, is retired officially. I'm still doing most of the work that I was doing as a contingent faculty member, focusing particularly on labor education and labor studies over most of my career, but not exclusively, at all levels of higher education, and before that I was a public school teacher. So one of the advantages of being contingent is that you taught in a lot of places, and if you've moved, which many of us have, in a lot of geographic areas, and we actually have a broader view of public education, of education in general and higher education than the average full-time tenure track person or than the average administrator. And if we collectively put that knowledge together, we can create a movement that can outsmart them. Unfortunately, that is, of course, the slip between the cup and the lip. It is not easy to do that. That is organizing. That's my hobby horse. And as Maria mentioned, so I want to say a couple of things about academic freedom as it applies particularly to the majority of people teaching college classes and doing research too, by the way. The majority of people doing research don't have academic freedom either. If you look at the lists, you count all the graduate students and all the research-only soft money researchers. The majority of researchers do not have the traditional protection of tenure and academic freedom either. A little known fact, I think. First, let me say, when you're even talking about this, I just spent 6 months teaching in Vietnam. My wife and I that's our retirement project. It goes to show that even old people can have adventures. And teaching labor studies at a university sponsored by the trade union movement in Vietnam, where they, of course, are facing tremendous changes in the whole system of employment. Now it's a mostly capitalist employment system, and they need to develop an industrial relations system and a labor movement that can respond to that, which is not easy, of course. And we try to contribute a little bit to that effort. The idea, I will say the non-traditional idea, because it's really only 2 generations old even in the United States, that academics should have freedom to speak and research and write pretty much based on their own individual conscience once they've passed a reasonable probation period and demonstrated a certain level of professional competence. That's the outlier historically and worldwide. Right? That is not assumed in most of the world today, and it is not assumed over most of the history of the United States. And one of the things that changed that, of course, is this organization that we're sponsoring this meeting today, although not only that, but certainly AAUP is one of the key reasons for that. So I want to underline that the violations of academic freedom, in theory, are overwhelmingly worldwide in the direction of forcing people to adopt the current neoliberal capitalist orthodoxy, ideologically and practically. That's the old, for a little context, right? That's the context. Why? Well, basic political economy. Who holds the power? The power of those who rule are the ruling ideas. It's not a difficult concept. but one that needs to get said out loud to set a context for the discussion, I believe. And that is true in academia as well as the rest of society. As has been mentioned, contingents cannot, by definition, have real academic freedom protection, but we can exercise it, of course, just like we can exercise many rights that we do not have legal rights. Just as gay people could exercise the right to have committed relationships and demand that they be recognized long before that was legally sanctioned recently in most places. The only protection that most of us have for violations and attacks on our freedom of speech and research on the job and in the society is the willingness of others to engage in collective struggle to defend us, and to defend us collectively, and to see that as a collective value, both on the campus, among students, fellow teachers, fellow workers, and in society as a whole. That's, of course, the result of organizing and agitation and the creation of a social movement and of institutions that support that and the continuation of that social movement, institutions like AAUP, like unions, and like many other kinds of organizations. But the norm is nothing. The cases that mostly were cited here are cases that are above the glacier, above the waterline, and get news when they fire full-time tenure-track faculty. I had a lot of work to get written, as they should. But the vast majority of cases of violation of academic freedom are of the majority of us who are non-tenure track, and they never get above the waterline. They never get publicity, right? People shut up, put their tails between their legs, and try and find another job for fear of being blacklisted out of the profession completely, or out of the area if they're place-bound, as most contingents are. And they never rise to that level of visibility. And so it's possible to have a very, very, very distorted view of what the reality is and what the struggle is. Just like it's possible, because of the distortion in media focus, to believe that the majority of higher education is Research One universities, which has already been mentioned, of course, that that's not the case. That's a tiny percentage, less than 15%, I believe. Certainly less than 20% of the total number of students and teachers work in Research One universities, and yet that's overwhelmingly the publicity. That's what's written about, and the vision that people have. To the extent that people use the word university as synonymous with higher education. And in this forum, from now on today, every time people do that, I will raise my hand and challenge you and say, change your language. And I wish AAUP would change the language of its title even, but that ain't gonna happen. But that shows where the ideology came from, right? Right? There was a time when you would have had to buy a ticket and be vouchered to come into this room. Sponsored by AAUP. It wasn't an open organization. Now, I think that academic freedom is the wrong lingo, the wrong framework to use for this fight. I hope I've demonstrated that I am on that side. But I think it's the wrong lingo to use to build a movement for what I call workers' free speech rights on the job. That's what we need. For two reasons. One, because it's right and it will build a better society for everybody. And number two, because fighting primarily in the framework for academic freedom, for academics as a special class, is a loser politically. It's a loser. Whether it should be a loser or not is a whole other matter that I'm not going to get into. But it is a loser. Fighting for the special rights for us, who most people already see us, correctly or incorrectly, as having a whole bunch of special rights, like defined benefit pensions and health insurance and 3 months off in the summertime and all the things that people perceive us, 2 minutes, thank you, perceive us as having, that they don't have or have lost. And the politics, the power of the politics of resentment out there, you know, we've all seen. But we should embrace those people on the basis of our commonality and not run away from them because of their superficial attitudes that are created by the media and the ruling class, if you will, to divide us. But we have to embrace the idea that we're workers. Yeah, skilled, educated, professional workers. And all workers should have free speech rights on the job after a reasonable probation demonstrating their capacity to do the work and to learn what's necessary to do the work. And I don't think 6 years is required by any means to do that. I think the per-term tenure system has a lot of problems. I'm not in favor of abolishing tenure as it exists, taking away the degree of job security that exists for the shrinking 20-25% of the group that has it would not add to mine. You know, I'm not into the politics of resentment. That is not going to add anything. It's only going to make things worse. But I'm not going to waste a lot of time defending the current tenure system either, which is whimsical, corrupt, and many other things that have been accused of. A lot of those accusations are certainly correct. I'm the spouse of somebody of a woman who was denied tenure, and in an institution where they had refused tenure to the previous 8 women, rather, who weren't really seen as people, as it turns out. This was the University of Illinois. I'm not scared to name names, where I also worked, but I never got a tenure-track job, so I didn't face that problem. My point on this is that you don't want to go to a lawyer who doesn't feel free to speak the truth as he sees it to you as a client. Likewise, a healthcare worker, doctor or nurse, you don't want to deal with them if they are looking over their shoulder to the insurance companies or the hospital administrator and can't speak to you the full truth as they see it. You know, you don't want anybody creating food for you, from the lowest fast food level to the highest restaurant, who doesn't have the freedom on the job to say, this isn't good, or this isn't safe, or I'm too sick to cook today. But all those things exist. All those violations of worker rights and freedom, and therefore of the recipients of goods and services. I don't even want an assembly line worker to not have the freedom to stop the line and say, this is wrong, this is bad, these cars are going to blow up. What if people in Volkswagen had really had free speech on the job? You think things would have developed the way they did? No. Instead of having individual little whistleblower protection laws that don't get enforced very well and that require people to expend humongous amounts of money in order to do it, in order to protect their rights that way, we should just have free speech rights on the job for all workers. Think how that would be different, and think how that would change the whole society into our image of what the university should be, a place for the exercise and combat of ideas, and everybody a student all the time. I think I'll probably stop there. Thank you.
Well, thanks. I mean, that's a tremendous presentation. I think a lot of people on this panel are too modest. Caprice Lawless is the first firm attempt adjunct to become a national officer in the 100-year history of the AAUP. I think the Colorado Conference itself is a constructive tenure project at the University of Colorado, and our relentless efforts through the state legislature to give equal work for equal pay is probably at the cutting edge. We're probably the leading conference in the AAUP in terms of adjunct and contingent issues. Maria Maisto, I don't know if some of you are aware of this, is pretty much the spokesperson for the contingent faculty movement. If you've ever read an article in the newspaper about higher education, the circumstance of contingency, you've probably seen her quoted, and Joe Barry is the godfather, so to speak, of the contingent faculty movement.
I've been called worse things than that.
By the way,
Come on, come up with something worse than that.
oh, I will. And in fact, I have. You just didn't
Yes,
hear
yeah,
it.
no, some of them I've heard.
By the way, one thing I love about the contingent faculty movement is that we do disagree about many things. I disagree with Joe Barry about many things. I mean, I would just love it if all workers had the equivalent of academic freedom, for example. But as it happens, the argument that as the pursuers and transmitters of knowledge, academic professionals are unique. It's a very elitist argument, but we're not like other workers. We work for the good of society, where they work for private means, such as making money for themselves and making money for others. Therefore, as the transmitters and the pursuers of knowledge, we have unique responsibilities for the whole society and therefore require unique protections. So that's the AAUP line. It's attractive to me. I'm not quite sure why sometimes.
Since you're a member of the elite, that's attractive. Of course it is.
You know, Joe, I think you nailed it. I have so little to feel good about, but that's it. No, I mean, it is unquestionably an elitist argument. There's no getting around that. It doesn't bother me, but I do find the argument attractive. That we have unique responsibilities and therefore require unique protections that some people, their professions don't. Any questions? I mean, this is a tremendous panel that we have here. Any questions? Tom?
I was very interested in Joe Barry's remarks in particular, and I strongly agree with the importance of defending workers' rights on the job.
Sure.
But I also think that the universities have a rather special responsibility. And that's what I asked earlier, the question of what I thought the role of the university in society was. And I consider one of the great important roles of the university is to be an independent, critical voice upon the direction which society is moving in. Now, I taught at this university and other for 45 years. I retired some while ago. And I taught all kinds of subjects. But the thing that students remember most about me, I hear all the time, is that I cared about the social issues of society. That's what I hear continually about people. They remember me. You were a person who cared. Now, I honestly believe that one of my critics of this place should be filled. I'm insulted that so few people are attending this academic freedom because it's a huge issue, and the fact that so few people are here is indicative, in my mind, of the problem which we have. That the people are unwilling or afraid of defending their rights. Now, my opinion is that most people academics don't need any academic freedom, because they would never be inclined to say anything which would challenge anything, which would be subject to academic. And I always have been angry at the passivity of the faculty in addressing the huge problems of society. And the people who do speak out are rare and precious voices. That's why the dismissal of Ward Churchill was such an egregious blow. He was one of the great voices of really encouraged critical thinking. And I think I consider one of the great problems of academia is that so few people need to have their academic freedom defended because they're so unwilling to say anything which would be important about the way in which society moves. So that's a little bit of speech, but what I was thinking about.
Can I respond, or do you want to take some other questions? And then other people too. But well, let me respond first to your general question. I don't think there is a single mission to the university or higher education in the United States. It's always been contested. It's always been a moving target. It's always been a process of the historical dialectic and the relation of power relations within this or any other society. Now, we can say the vision that we support and that we will fight for within that terrain is what you describe, and I would agree with that as a very important part of that vision. But to say that, it was that once and it's not now is simply historically incorrect. It's always been contested. What will the bottle look like? What will the wine that goes in the bottle be? I was trained as a historian and then moved into labor studies. This is, I gotta say that. I think fear is a greatly underplayed factor in American politics because we can't be admitted. This is land of the free and home of the brave, right? Nobody is ever supposed to admit that their behavior is governed by a daily sense of fear of those who have power over them. And that's a real problem. Even the people who have the most job security of any vocational group in the United States, which is tenured full-time faculty members in public institutions, nobody's got more job security than you guys. Nobody. And yet, on the average, your characterization is correct. People are timid sheep. And why is that? Well, you know, that's a bigger discussion, but it needs to be approached not from the point of view of just berating people, why aren't there more people here, but how do we organize more people to come together, feel their power, feel more courageous and less fearful, you know, feel more hopeful and less fatalistic. That's the organizing process, and that's what we need to be looking at. Not, you know, not just berating people for their privilege or for not being here in this room or in any other room. I've been in a lot of meetings. What I really am is an organizer and a teacher, not a writer and a scholar. And, you know, it doesn't help to berate who's not there. The thing to do is to build on who came, even if it's one person. As an organizer, I've been in meetings that got one person. And then I've had other meetings where we had to get more chairs in. Now, obviously, those are the better ones.
It helps me to berate the people who aren't here.
But, see, I don't think that's useful. So I'm challenging that aspect of what you said. And let me end with a couple of jokes regarding following up on your joke. That, you know, one of there's a whole bunch of sort of jokes that exist below the waterline among contingent faculty that don't usually get said in mixed company. So I'll share a couple with you. One of them, making the point that you just made, is that for the most part, tenure is wasted on the tenured. And that's, of course. And the other one, directed at our situation, is that any contingent faculty member who says that they teach their class function on the campus in the same way exactly that they would if they had full job security equivalent to tenure is either A, lying, or B, too stupid to be trusted with a class.
I guess if someone falls into the second category, can I respond to?
Yeah, sure, Nick.
Sure, thank you. I just want to say that part of the reason I was fired too was to send a message to all the other adjunct faculty, be afraid. I was the adjunct representative of the Faculty Senate, I was the president of the Adjunct Alliance, and I was the president of the CCA chapter of the AAUP. And part of the reason they fired me was to send a message to everybody else, if you stand up, your fate will be the same as him, and we just threw him in the trash can. Be afraid, be afraid, be afraid.
You know, tenure doesn't work to defend academic freedom. The same people who spoke out before they had the tenure, and people who didn't speak out before they had tenure don't speak out after they have tenure. You know, it's totally ineffective in terms of protecting real speech.
Jonathan?
So I'm the representative of Nick's company here. I have tenure, but what can I do to help I mean, I think the adjuncts on my campus are treated terribly, and
Where are you?
Pardon me?
Where are you?
CSU Pueblo. And, you know, I talked to them some privately, and they have concerns about speaking out, and I had a colleague who had a statement about a thing happening on our campus, and he made copies, and he went after hours to slip it into people's mailboxes. What can we do to make things, to give them some, is there any way I can give some of the benefit of my protection, unearned as it is, to my colleagues?
Yeah, well, certainly speaking publicly is one of the easiest and most effective ways that you can do it, because what you're doing then is communicating to the rest of the community that, to the adjuncts, that there are people there who are willing to stand up, and hopefully talk to your colleagues about standing up and behaving in more collective ways in solidarity with adjuncts. So, you know, in terms of just creating a climate that is less fearful, I think that there's a lot that tenured faculty can do. And it certainly helped me when I got started in my organizing, and I was also the adjunct representative of the Faculty Senate, but I met Steve Abbey from the AAUP. And knowing that he was there, that he was speaking out, that chapter, well, not all of that chapter, but that's another story, but that he was speaking out, was absolutely critical to helping me develop as a leader and to screw up the courage and to start the organizing process. So don't, it's kind of ironic, a lot of tenured faculty get very modest about what they're able to do, but you do have that power, and that's really important. And then there are actual practical things you can do. And the practical things include making sure people know that they can apply for unemployment compensation. Part of the reason that we have embarked on this project, which Joe really pioneered in terms of promoting adjunct faculty access to unemployment compensation, is to start, well, number one, to give some actual material support to adjuncts in between academic terms when they really, really need it. But number two, to start attacking the structural model of contingency, making it more expensive for institutions. Because when a lot of adjunct faculty start applying for unemployment, then the cost of contingency goes up for institutions. Right now, they're having their cake and eating it too, and we have to address that. So, trying to think of ways, even if they're imperfect, and CSU is working on this now too, to give contingent faculty more structural protections so that they have the security so that they can begin to speak out and do more organizing is absolutely critical.
Right, and I just wanted to say too that, and we need a process at every institution by which adjunct faculty can move into full-time positions. You know, there's no process, and those who are full-time can be demanding that. We're in an institution that is 80% adjunct faculty, and most of the faculty senates have one or two adjunct faculty on them. It's not even representative. So the full-timers have an onus to insist on that, right? To insist on it. When an adjunct faculty member, like our colleague Larry Eason, who's one of the rare PhDs in the community college system, finally just threatened to quit out of frustration, tired of the bullying, nobody went to his defense. And he's gone now, and nobody's saying, where's Larry? Right? My problem as an organizer is losing teachers who are going into insurance or working at copy centers. They're leaving the profession for good, and it's a loss of our intellectual capital. And the full-timers in our midst have a responsibility to question that process.
Other questions?
I think
I want to respond.
we want to respond to his
Okay, great.
important question.
My answer is very short and simple. What you can do is show courage in the face of danger. Courage is contagious. If you stand up and you're seen publicly standing up and being brave and fighting back against all this, a lot of people who are timid will stand up with you. A lot of them, there's a shield of fear, but if they see someone break that and get through that wall, they'll be just a little bit more brave. And the further you go and the more bravery you demonstrate, the more they'll come through that crap with you.
I'd like to say a thing too. A couple of things. One, in your interactions with contingents, listen more than you talk. And know that you never know fully what they know and think, because they can't afford to be fully open with you. Because you might be on the next hiring committee, the next department chair, and your network of contacts is different and more powerful than theirs. They can't afford to be fully open with you. I mean, there's exceptions, of course, but I'm talking about in general.
Sure, absolutely.
Number two, when there is struggle that gets above the waterline, whether it's an individual standing up or, most important, any kind of collective struggle, support that publicly and privately. And even if you think that there's problems with the way they're forming it and stuff, don't you try and lead that struggle. Don't you try and shape that struggle. Your job is to support it if you think in general it's pointed in the direction of more rights and equality for contingents. Because the strategy, if it's to work, people have got to learn make their own mistakes, run their own organizations, build their own organizations. And I say the same thing to union leaders, full-time and staff union leaders. You know, people have got to learn collectively. The learning and struggle is the only learning that matters.
Don?
Let me interject a second.
Okay, we have an interjection, a 1-second
I just
interjection.
wanted to point out about the CSU proposal. I don't know if this is working, but that it's really important to share information institutionally. I've already been asked and have shared the whole dossier with the University of Colorado Springs. They're very interested in it. We will share it with Pueblo. We will share it with any institution in the state that needs it, because it may not be the perfect pathway, but it is suggestive in many different respects, and I think can be used as a way of going forward at any one of our Colorado institutions, so including the community colleges, for that matter of fact. And so Caprice has seen some of this, but
Margaret LeConte.
I just want to speak to the,
Could you use the mic?
pardon me?
Could you use the mic, please?
Yes.
It's good you speak to the group, but then I can't hear what you're saying.
Okay. All I want to say is that at any institution, it's really important to have social events that create solidarity, spaghetti dinners, getting people, no, I'm serious. Invite a contingent to dinner. Invite the contingents to your adjunct professors to get together and come to your AAUP meetings, so you share wisdom. The bravest people in our chapter were people who were contingents and instructors, and in one case, a staff advisor. And those people were far braver than the tenured faculty and far more present than the tenured faculty. And the University of Colorado chapter would not have the strength that it did without them. So in a sense, they have the Janis Joplin philosophy. They're a lot braver than the tenured faculty. But you have to reach out and make a social event. You know, Caprice is the expert on these kinds of things. You know, it's beer and Skittles or whatever.
It wouldn't take much to be braver than the tenured faculty, let me tell you.
Here, I think that's right, Tom.
Not everybody requires academic freedom, but it should be there for those who need it. I want to emphasize a couple of things Joe said earlier. One, in terms of the candor that contingent faculty will talk if you are a tenured faculty person. They may, it may be that they would be perfectly all right if they were candid with you, but they may just feel that they can't take that chance. And it's just too much of a risk. And that's so much, as a contingent activist myself, it's so much of what we affect is people who just feel, even if they could take the risk, they just believe that they just cannot because there's too much at stake, too much to lose. Another thing Joe said that I would like to emphasize is that contingent faculty movements need to be led by contingent faculty. I'll say that again, they need to be led by contingent faculty. Those are the only successful movements that have ever been for contingent faculty. Chris?
So, see whether this makes sense. 2000, I went to the convention of the Reform Party. A friend of mine was going to be nominated for presidency, and I talked to the candidates, and they were almost all working class people. People support Pat Buchanan, working class people, like the people support Donald Trump. And I was the professor, and they said, you have tenure, they all do that. Why should you have job security, and my job is moved to another country or to another state? And my response was, look, when I was a kid, many Americans had job security. If you work for IBM, if you work for GM, if you work for US Steel, de facto, you had a lifetime job unless you committed criminal activity, which is what tenure is supposed to be. What we need to do is turn the country around so we see that our country is working for jobs for people who want to be professors, and those who want to build cars, and those who want to work in computers, and that's what our policies are. And this is a thing where it's very disappointing, where right and left are potentially so close to see that a change in attitude where protecting jobs on campuses is part of protecting jobs for all parts of the economy, and that may include things like the tariff, and it may include things like making sure that Americans' jobs are for Americans. And I mean, that seemed to me to make sense, and it seemed to them to make sense. So we weren't, you know, geniuses who we get job protection, because I'm so important, and a guy building our cars and making our steel and making our computers is not important, because I don't think that at all. And in fact, in those days, making our TV sets, which we don't make anymore, and making our microwave ovens, which happened for a certain period. And that's the thing what I see, we have a lot in common if we get together with the idea that we're part of one country and our job, our academic job, is to help create the vocation of citizen. And then when we're citizens, our jobs are part of allowing that to be a free country. So that's the way I see academics working with the labor movement if that ever happens.
It's already happening.
Okay.
In many cities, the academic organizers are working with steel workers and
Yeah, I'm
SEIU
organizing with the
and-
steelworkers
Right.
in Ohio. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of non-traditionally academic unions, non-traditional unions which are not academic unions, have embarked on organizing academic workers. And I think that's to the good, because it is creating that kind of solidarity. And I think to the point of what people can do, I think we also have to take the conversation out of higher education. We have to get into the community and into the public sphere, which is one of the things that we've been trying to do in NFM, which is why I talk to a lot of media, because I'm going to lose I call myself a once and future adjunct. I never know when I'm going to have a class, right? But I am a mom of 3 kids, one of whom hopefully will be going to college next year. So I have an interest as a parent. I have an interest as a citizen. I have an interest as someone who is concerned about my community. So this conversation does not have to remain within the confines of higher education. In fact, it has to be pushed out into the community so that we reconnect with the public good mission of higher education.
And I will say, we had a House bill and a Senate bill recently for equal pay for equal work at the community college system. And for our House bill, we had a coalition with many different labor groups. And from that, I actually marched with the Walmart workers when they were on strike, and I bumped into one of them, and they said, "Hey, when are you going to have a strike? We're going to come to your strike." So I'm like, So, those alliances are being made, right?
Can I say something on this one?
Let's see, why not?
I agree and disagree with what you said. But the agreements I have have been raised, so I want to mention the disagreement. I am in favor of, that we need to not view ourselves defined exclusively as privileged academics with a particular role that's more important than anybody else's. However, I wouldn't draw that line on a nationalist basis, as you did. I would draw that line on a class basis, worldwide. Because as long as they can export those jobs, I just spent 6 months in Vietnam, where they're exported, and people are afraid there of losing the jobs to Kampuchea and Laos and, places like where things are where worker wages are less. Profit rates can be higher for these multinational corporations. I think that the same thing applies, I'm a worker and a citizen of the world. And I'm a citizen of this country because of the accident of my birth. But that's not the basis of my loyalty. My loyalty is to my own interests, and my interests are the other people who are similarly situated around the world. And an example of that, I think, is that when people do raise that kind of stuff, they get attacked. I come from City College San Francisco, where we just finished we're not completely finished, but we won an important victory in a 5-year struggle where they're trying to close that place down. One of the biggest community colleges in the country, ranked as one of the best, and they wanted to close us down, all for things we were doing that was right. That we had more full-time faculty, full-time tenure-track faculty, and fewer adjuncts, relatively, than any other college in California. We had better pay for those people. We had some job security. We had preference for full-time jobs, one of the few places where people did, and consequently the majority of full-time faculty were ex-adjuncts, many ex-adjunct activists. It didn't keep people from getting jobs, changed the whole politics of the place, which was why we were attacked. And we had democratic governance. We elected department heads who also didn't run the union, but also were not administrators. And when the rain came, we spent the rainy day fund on programs and let administrative positions stay empty. These were all things that the accreditors and the neoliberal education deformers funding them, the Gateses and Luminas and all those foundations, this is what we were attacked for. Literally, I'm not making this up. If you want to, I brought a couple of documents from City College. If people want to look at it, it goes reports on the result of that whole struggle. And we finally did win. But we also have been one of the most outspoken in making alliances with our community. And in San Francisco, that means making alliances, defining our community more broadly than the city, the state, the nation. Because that's a good sell in San Francisco, because every class we teach is like a baby United Nations. You know, I got maybe 20% of the people in the classroom who were born in the city, right? And they've taught me much more over my career than I ever taught them.
Okay, thank you. But by the way, when I talk about the original justification for tenure, the so-called elitist argument, there's often a distinction between AAP philosophy and reality and the practices that the AAP has to take in order to expand their franchise and increase academic freedom. And certainly the practices of the current AAP and the AAP leadership is very much in line with what Joe's talking about, in joining hands with other workers in collective action on behalf of all of us. Vinny.
Thank you. So what I'm sort of seeing here, based on what you were saying, was, right, part of the problem we're facing here is there's a loss of freedom because the corporate model doesn't value that because it's not as profitable. Part of what's going on with all the companies shipping jobs overseas is the corporate model says, do the maximally profitable thing.
That's right.
Oh, the people in Thailand want too much money, go to Laos. The people in Laos want too much money, go find some smaller country. Right? It's make money no matter what. And I think the problem is the loyalty of the corporate model is not to the country,
Right.
It's not to the human race,
Yeah.
it's to the people at the very top who make all that money, and everything else gets sacrificed at that altar.
That's right. Absolutely.
Okay.
James, do you want to get
Yeah, my question is for Joe and Maria. I agree with everything you said. I think it's really important that we are in solidarity with workers and industrial workers, not like the craft union model. It seems to me that historically speaking, that's what's worked, the radical union models at the turn of the century. But that was applied to like a boss exploiting employees. How do we have to change and adapt that model to the administrative run, where profits are spread out everywhere, bureaucratic institutions like academia?
Well, I would say it's much more similar to the history than it is different. The idea that everything has changed is, whether it's after 9/11 or anything. I mean, excuse me, hearing aid is beeping at me. So I think that, the continuations of trends and situations are much more than the differences. The differences get overstated by our enemies to keep us from taking the actions that are necessary. To say, well, unions were good then, but they aren't necessary now, or unions were good for industrial workers, but now that most people are service professional workers, they aren't necessary, or well, you could organize industrial workers, but you can't organize service workers or distributed workers or contingent workers, which is a huge percentage of labor force today. And that's all not true, but 75 years ago they said you couldn't organize the mass production industries because those are all immigrants and their children and they don't have any particular skills and they're not organizable. And people in the labor movement said that, in the trades. And that was wrong then, and it got demonstrated in practice it was wrong then. And, you know, I'm not saying that we don't need new models and new thinking. We do. But the idea that fundamentally things have changed, you know, the fundamentals have not changed. Last time I checked, this is still capitalism. Majority of people are working to support themselves, and the majority of people who employ people are employing people to make profits. And the difference between the public sector and the private sector under capitalist society is definitely converging. You know, those differences in practice are getting less and less as the public sector and the government becomes more and more merged into private industry and private interests, and the current regime is the most extreme example of that so far. But that's also true of the so-called private nonprofit sector, which is becoming more and more converged as well. And which, by the way, only exists in this country and only exists because rich people didn't want to pay taxes. I mean, that's why it exists. And they still don't want to pay taxes. What's new?
Well, another amazing
Can I just say-
discussion.
can I just
Oh,
say-
please do.
I just want to make one point, because I do think you're making a very important point, and I don't disagree with Joe, but I also think that there are new models emerging, and that we have to be very cognizant of how how those new models are emerging, and particularly about the way that women are figuring in the organizing and in the strategizing.
Absolutely.
Because there are very different ideas that are coming to the fore, and even within the labor movement, women's voices are often shouted down, suppressed, looked at with disdain, and so it becomes very challenging for people like Caprice and me to stand up and speak about that. And if we can't start doing that in the context of higher education, and we need to do it too, to model it for our students, for our women students, because that's the future as well. So I just wanted to say that.
That's one of the great things about the contingent faculty movement, is that so many of the leaders are, with so much of the intellectual power and force and guts and bravery are women. Now, I hate to say, Mel, I'm gonna ask you to, I'd like to take 10 minutes now. Maria has to take off. Caprice is gonna be around all day. Nate's gonna be around all day. Joe's gonna be around until I drive him to the bus station at 5:30 tomorrow morning, so you can talk to him before then. We're gonna take about 10 minutes now, and technology and the future of higher education, Jonathan Poritz. So thank you so much, and we'll see you in 10 minutes. Oh yeah, I should mention, we ordered pizzas for lunch, and we have them coming, so you can look forward to that, and, you know, and we'll...